Welcome to this second panel section on the protecting the planet. We believe, like was stated in the plenary section earlier, we had snow during the spring, and everyone was like, what is going on? So I want to talk about how do we protect our planet from energy perspective, from biodiversity perspective, from community perspective. And that is because we are trying to protect the 9 planetary boundaries, which the world has crossed 6 right now. And from air pollution to water pollutions to land pollutions in South Africa, which has also led to the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan of the government, leading to a political declaration for a low-carbon economy. So we just want to engage with our panelists here and want to hear their point of view and their perspective and expertise on that. So I'm going to, Mr. Frank was with me earlier, so I'm going to start from. So please just introduce yourself, and then I just want to ask a question on how do we strengthen how can community engagement and education improve effort to conserve natural resources? Because everything we are saying, the climate change boils down to how do we use natural resources. And please, other panelists, you are also free to contribute to his perspective. Just let me know. Thank you. Yes.
Good morning, everybody. Or is it afternoon? My name is Shurldrae Rosen. I'm one of the directors for Bubele Africa. We actually started in 2020 when we noticed that so many people lost their jobs, and then we decided to employ people off the streets, and in return we exchanged a bit of food and food and money. And we actually just managed to restore so much of, I would say, the wildlife or bird life around our rivers in Johannesburg. And I think that to come to your question that you were asking me as well, I think water is one of the resources that this planet cannot go without. I think there's a lot of things that we cannot go without. Water, number one. And our motto is, we all drink from the same rivers. And if we look after our water, and we teach our kids, number one, also, that water doesn't come from a tap, there will be a different understanding and appreciation also for how we conserve and how we use water.
So how does community engagement and education improve effort to, let's say you choose water, to protect water resource?
So one of our challenges that we are facing, so we've been cleaning up, for example, the Zandspruit and the Yixke as well. And one of our challenges is education around understanding that people shouldn't be wasting in the water. Again, like I said, there's, unfortunately, especially in the city, we have this idea that water comes from a tap. We've literally stood at rivers where we watch people dumping into the river while we are busy cleaning the river. And then it just pointed back to there's a lack of resources within those communities that lives off the river, lives off in inverted commas. There's no bins for them to throw their waste into. There's no education around that. This water that you pretty much wasting into is the same water that you're going to be drinking. So that's pretty much what we are facing, and what we are trying to work towards is educating. The previous speaker mentioned something about training, and I 100% agree with that as well also. Many of us, we grow up already being trained. For example, if you're living in the village, you're already trained on how to look after your resources around you and how those resources works for you. Whereas in the city, unfortunately, we think that the food comes off a shelf and the water comes out of a tap, and there's no training around that. And then later on, when people become a bit older, it's almost hard to try and train people and make them understand that these resources need to be looked after so that we do not have to pay so much money, for example, to try and keep our water clean. If we start from a very young age already understanding that we need to make sure to look after our resources that we have around us. I'm from Cape Town, moved to Johannesburg, came in Johannesburg, and then discovered all of this, And I thought to myself, how am I going to start implementing and fixing things within my reach? And the river that we are looking after right now is literally just down the road from where I live. So we have to start with what can we fix and how can we make sure that the resources around us, the land around us, is being looked after before we continue moving on.
Good, thank you. You have given us this.
All right. Is this on?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So my name is Gail Styger. I'm from the What If Trust, and we work primarily in Diepsloot. We only work in Diepsloot, which is quite an interesting model because I think for a lot of people, they work across communities. We work in one community. So adding to what you're saying, if you take an ecosystem approach to a community, then it is about the rivers, but then it's about the waste that you collect. What are you doing with it? Do people understand that there's value in that waste? Are we educating people about separation at source so that that waste doesn't arrive in the river in the first place? Are we teaching people that clogged rivers cause flooding? Are we helping people to try and see that they can create businesses from selling plastic and those kind of things? So we also can expand from that education and that awareness into business opportunities, into green entrepreneurs, and I think that's where the magic happens. Not just about, I think a lot of organizations are doing lots of really good things, but we're not tying them all together to make one big impact, and I think that's something we need to be looking at. I know you wanted to comment.
Thank you, please.
Thank you. Is it on? Doesn't look on.
Yeah.
There you go.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Khwezi Cenenda. I'm with Avocado Vision. Ava is a social impact business that does community education, livelihood creation, as well as enterprise and supply development. I think to add to this question, one of the things that we found really impactful in terms of education and bringing community together is creating stewards within communities. So we work in deep rural areas with regards to our green work. And in this one village, in fact in a couple of villages in Madadiela down in Eastern Cape, we've worked with high school students who have then become advocates and custodians and literally the people who tell older people how to interact and behave with the lakes and rivers around them. So for us, we found that this thing of going into an area and then coming out, where you sometimes, things get undone when you come out, is that you do need to create the local capacity for the sustainability to happen, where people feel that there's ownership and they can see the benefits for themselves and then want to own it, take their families on that ride as well as their communities. I think what's also key is that a lot of times we think we're coming in with expert advice, knowledge, and all sorts of things, when locally there's a lot, and I think one of the speakers previously did allude to it. This thing of coming in and training the people as opposed to working with people with their own systems and figuring out from them what is going to get us to where we want to get after you've figured out with them as well where it is that they want to go. It also makes a massive difference in terms of creating that local ownership because it's no longer that thing that you come in to do. They see you as a partner in helping them reach where they want to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the contribution. Do you have contributions, or I should go to the next question? Thank you very much, Mr. Frank. There are a lot of projects from the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan of the government, and especially in ESCOM, there's going to retire 12 gigawatt of coal plants and add 18 gigawatt of wind and solar PV. How does all this affect employability? Because everybody's talking about reskilling in the energy industry, upskilling. How does it, should we be afraid? How does this affect employment in the energy industry? And how does organizations and government collaborate to address possible retrenchment, possible shift in the skill that is required in the renewable energy space now?
Hi again, everyone. Yeah, that's a big question because it is a really topical and controversial issue. But I'm glad to say, as a country, South Africa has made significant strides in defining what the pathway towards that just transition looks like. So to start with, there is like a building block. So the Presidential Climate Commission, what they've done is they've created what's called the Just Transition Framework, which sort of like a roadmap to what it takes for that just transition. And I'm just going to mention two things. I think the first thing is the three principles in that framework are quite important in sort of like helping us to answer the question that you're asking. So the first principle in the just transition framework is around distributive justice. So it looks at saying the risk associated with the transition, the benefits associated with the transition, everyone has to benefit from it, including the mine workers themselves, including the communities where most of the fossil fuel mining is happening, and including youth and women. And then the second principle is around restorative justice. So is to say, we understand the inequality that's already existing. How do we, as we transition, sort of like address that inequality? And that's where issues around upskilling of the workers come in. That's where issues around reskilling of the core workers come in. That's the issue of like, so in the implementation plan of that framework, there is a whole chapter around skills and employability. And it's looking at, as we build into the low carbon green economy, how do we ensure that young people, how do we ensure that the previous workers in the coal mines can also have the skills to participate in that economy? And then the last principle, I think, to the point that was raised earlier, really is around procedural justice. So it is exactly what the previous speaker was talking about, to say nothing about us without us. So really engaging the communities in saying, as we diversify from this fossil fuel economy to a green, low carbon economy, what opportunities do you see in your communities as economic opportunities? And what, as the government, as the private sector, as development partners, can do to help people transition into this opportunity? So we have already heard about some of those opportunities in the circular economy, recycling, upcycling, and creating value out of those opportunities that are also good for the environment. So there is a plan. There is sort of like an implementation plan to that framework. The work really is around government, private sector, development partners, community-based organization to go into those communities and engage the communities.
Thank you very much. I would just want to provide some backgrounds, then while you weigh in on the same questions. I think earlier this year we did some trainings on just energy transition. There are major issues that we are willing to learn, but at the same time also they have existing duties, existing responsibilities in their organizations. So if everybody is going to reskill, everybody is going to upskill per se, how do you work around that employment is not, because some of them were threatened with queries, with all sort of complaints, you have to be here, and it even affected concentration levels of this participant in those trainings. So in moving to a just energy transition, how do we revolve around apart from the plan? Because from what I'm getting is the approach to the plan, the approach to implementing the plan. Do you have some perspective? Let me start with Ms. Gail here.
Our experience has been that people are so used to a survivalist mentality that I think they're not really believing it's necessarily going to happen. And when it happens, I'll survive. So many people get by with a hustle, and, we've seen people not really kind of think about next month or next year, but the immediate. So I think possibly we're not messaging correctly. Maybe people are not understanding exactly what it is we're trying to achieve.
Good, thank you.
What your take is.
Yeah, so, we have a project in an area that's directly affected by the situation because it is a labor sending area for a mine. One of the key things we're learning is, one is getting people to walk along the path with you becomes critical. But I think the beauty of Africa is that our problems create opportunities. And this is one of the things we've been able to learn in this particular area, where it's a livestock-rich area, where livestock no longer has places to graze because the carrying capacity has been killed by bush encroachment, which we know that at the level of government is a key issue that needs to be solved. At the level of this community, they have to buy animal feed because there is no grazing land. And so because this particular issue poses such an obvious opportunity, because it's such a burden on this community, it's been a channel through which we've been able to address issues of creating jobs outside of the mine, because the typical scenario is that mining communities expect jobs from the mine. There's also have to be thoughts around if the mine is going to be giving bursaries, why do you continue giving mining sector related type of bursaries? It makes no sense if this mine is planning to close. Let's start skilling the community as well as our staffing in a different way. So our skills
system approach again.
Our skills development budgets are now going to be used differently, which is a big cultural shift within the mining sector. And then it's also thinking about how do you create agency with communities. So are we engaging in projects where everybody is invited to be a part of this project and when it ends, it's gone? Or are we creating entrepreneurs and truly investing in developing them as entrepreneurs? 1. 2 is, are you working with the land in such a way that it creates opportunities in perpetuity? So, for example, by working with this issue, you are restoring natural biodiversity, you are bringing land back to the people, which can then be used for crop planting and for animal husbandry, and then you bring in partners that can also help us with thinking about the everyday practices that will promote that word that wasn't liked, sustainability. But at the end of the day, it is a key issue that it needs to be looked across and from all angles. And then you invest in a community for some years before you think they can do it on their own. And that for us is the path that we're on, because we do realize that the land has so much to offer. That's what we probably are guaranteed of, but we need to treat it well for us to be able to, for it to be able to serve us for the long term. And that for us has been one avenue where we've been able to say that there are opportunities with the just energy transition, but it has to be embedded in what's good for the people for the long term. In other communities, we have people beneficiating, for example, making green artisanal charcoal, using alien invasive species. But the key thing is you don't just take what you need, you have to be responsible for making sure that that land is then usable, that land is then restored and kept well. So you then involve partners that can help people with the right practices in terms of how do you keep a forest, for example, clear? How do you clear in such a way that it's responsible? And then, of course, you provide incentives for the entrepreneurs, for them to do the right thing. And the beauty of that is that the impact is so immediate. The impact is such that people will say, we used to have to go up the mountain to do our washing. Now the water actually flows into our households because of the removal of the alien invasives, So it's also that kind of value where it's tangible for the people that gets them to support it in the long term.
Thank you very much. I'm just getting to the next questions. Ms. Gail, given all these environmental issues, circular economy is becoming a very innovative concept now. How do we turn these challenges into opportunities for community level, corporate level, and others?
So we've spoken a lot about education and awareness and also tapping into what knowledge is there. But I think the opportunities in the circular economy, so I'll give you an example. Over the last 2 years, we've trained 50 waste pickers to be more entrepreneurial, to become wastepreneurs, to really understand what the value streams are. Because typically your waste pickers are doing cardboard, paper, plastic, tin, aluminium, that kind of thing. We've been running a project for the Mr. Price Group where we're doing ink cartridge recycling. Enormous value because there's quite a lot of that hard plastic that we sell back to another organization who grinds it down and they make stepping stones and garden furniture and all of that sort of thing. So we work with the community to show them that there are opportunities in the circular economy. So interestingly, the community is already doing things like appliance repair, but not necessarily, recycling the parts of the appliances that can't be repaired. Those are going to landfill. So it's about this continual helping people to see the opportunities, but also helping people to to see new opportunities like e-waste, like I said, ink cartridges, food waste, things that are happening in the communities that are becoming a problem with litter that can actually be turned into entrepreneurial opportunities. And then being the way the gentleman used it, the shock absorber in between, and making those connections between the opportunity and the community.
Thank you.
Just add quickly. Is the mic on? Oh. Yeah. So I just want to add to what you were saying, and we were speaking about it earlier on, actually, just before we came onto the stage. What I've noticed from what we are doing is it actually starts way up on top. Again, I live here in Sandton, and we, as people that live in Sandton, we waste a lot. We just spend and spend and spend, and what we found with, especially with the people that the waste pickers. You won't find waste pickers picking waste in areas like Alex and so forth. Many of our waste pickers are within the affluent areas because we waste a lot. Hotels, for example, hospitals, and just in very affluent areas. And what we noticed was we saw so many, like, I'm sorry that I have to mention the company's name, but like Woolies boxes, and all these big brands boxes. And there's nothing that they're doing wrong, in my opinion. It's those who consume it. How do we consume it, and how do we, get rid of the waste? We think that when we toss our waste in the bin, it just goes somewhere. But then the waste picker comes, and they have to sort all of those waste there as well also. And it's all just a contributing factor to it. So from the top already, we need to know how are we also as consumers using what we are using, and how are we getting rid of it in a rightful way that we can also reuse it. I saw there's a new company that came out, Refillery, I think, where you need to come and refill your own, your like, for example, if you're going to get beans or whatever, and you come with your own jars and your own containers and so forth. And that is the kind of method that we need to start looking at working back towards.
But I want to just add something to that. As consumers, we must also give our waste pickers some respect. So they cannot sell contaminated waste. So we need to give them clean yogurt tubs, and we need to rinse out the milk bottle, and at least do some kind of separation at source so that they can get better value for their products.
Thank you very much. That's my last question, and because we're running out of time, I just want to ask Ms. Khwezi. How do we straighten value chain between environmental sustainability and job creation? Just in one word, and then we'll end.
Okay, thank you. So I think most importantly is partnerships. A lot of times in our space, you get an organization saying, I've got so much money, what can you do with it? And I think we need a lot more partnerships that say, what does the opportunity require? And then if it's an ecosystem approach then that we need to take in terms of having the right amount of resources in order to get the right impact, that's the kind of partnership that I think is required. So I think that's important. I think secondly is, I think there's a lot to learn in terms of the full value chain of how to support somebody towards commercialization. So in our sector, we don't collaborate. So one will come and train, another one will come into that, another one will come into that. If we all collaborated better as implementers, then we would also respect the fact that you need to, and I know in our areas this is what you need to do is, so for example, people don't know what the possibilities are with alien invasive species. So you train somebody, and then on an ongoing basis, they need to refine their craft. That's somebody's job. Somebody needs to train them in business acumen. Somebody needs to coach them. Somebody needs to help them with funding. And the thing is that one of the key things that does need to change is the way that developmental funding is dispersed. So we're sitting in a situation where people with very little education, very little exposure are, subject to the same kind of rigorous processes and requirements that somebody who's been in a corporate and decides to invent an app has to go through. It's a very different thing. How do you give somebody a loan and then expect them to start paying in the first or second month when they probably haven't even started using the money yet? Like a lot of the terms and conditions around how we disperse and, issue developmental funding have to change. And that's a key part of the value chain because you need to enable people financially. And also, a lot of us, I come from the innovation space where the lean startup is like a key thing. There's lean startup and then there's setting somebody up for failure. We need to give people enough for them to have a fighting chance at actually succeeding. That is also a key problem in this whole thing. And of course, access to markets, I think, is a key thing as well. people can create quality, and it needs to get to where it can get to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A pleasure. Round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much for your contributions.